Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Jason Dalton? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll go through a brief background. I'll move to the timeline of the crimes, then offer my analysis. Jason Dalton was born on June 22, 1970, in Greenfield, Indiana. He would later report having no behavioral problems as a child, so a relatively normal childhood based on his brief descriptions of it. He graduated from high school in 1989 before going to a community college. He would graduate from there in 1992 with an associate's degree in law enforcement. In 1995, he married and had 2 children. Dalton had a number of jobs. He thought about being a police officer, but that didn't work out for him. At some point, he became an automobile mechanic and later an insurance adjuster. During a time when he was working for an insurance company, it was reported that he was unprofessional and hostile. At the time of the attack, we know that Jason drove for Uber. He had only been there briefly. This takes us to February 20, 2016, in the area of Kalamazoo, Michigan. At some point in the afternoon, Dalton visits a gun store and buys a jacket designed to facilitate the concealment of a pistol. At 4 p.m., a man named Matt Mellon wanted to go to his friend's house, so he requested an Uber. Dalton was sent to pick him up, which he did at 4:21 p.m. in a silver Chevrolet Equinox. Just a few minutes into the journey, a phone call comes in to Dalton. Dalton tells the caller he will call them back when he drops off his passenger. After the call ends, Dalton started driving erratically. As his passenger was asking him to discontinue his behavior, Dalton drove his vehicle into oncoming traffic, was ignoring traffic control devices like stop signs and traffic lights, and almost collided with another vehicle. Mellon exited the vehicle when Dalton came to a stop. Mellon called the police and filled them in on his adventure, including a description of Dalton's SUV. Dalton arrived back at his residence at 4:34 p.m. Just after 5 p.m., he called his wife and requested the keys to another one of their vehicles, a Hummer H3. This is not one of those Hummers made by AM General. This is a later Hummer. It doesn't have the same quality as what we see before. The couple planned on meeting about 10 miles away at the residence of his parents. Dalton started heading in that direction, but then at 5:15 p.m., decided to accept another Uber pickup request. The customer was a woman who was in the Richland Township apartment complex. Before Dalton arrived, the woman texted a different address and tried to call him with that same information. He didn't answer. He aggressively drove through the apartment complex, presumably looking for her. Dalton pulled up next to a woman and started asking for somebody named Missy or Misty. She said that she was not that person. He started circling around a playground in his vehicle. Dalton shot the woman 4 times after this. He would fire 15 shots in total. The woman would survive her injuries. Dalton drove away from the scene of the shooting. He struck another vehicle at an intersection about a mile away. Dalton met up with his wife at his parents' residence. He told her that his SUV had been struck by an unhappy taxi driver driving an Impala. This taxi driver shot at him because he was upset about how Uber was taking away his business. Dalton told his wife that Uber would take care of everything, I guess like the damage to the vehicle. He gave her his Taurus PT-92 9mm semi-automatic pistol. He said that it was not safe to be at the residence without a weapon. She was not to go to work and not to take the children to school. Before he left, he told his wife he could not tell her what was happening, but it would be on the news. He climbed into the Hummer H3, but couldn't get it started. He ended up taking a Chevrolet HHR. This was his parents' vehicle that his wife was driving. Dalton drove to an ATM and withdrew money. This was at 6:44 p.m. He then drove around for about 35 minutes. At some point, he went back to his residence and switched pistols. He had used a Glock 19, but he switched to a Walther P99. Both are chambered in 9mm. At 7:37 p.m., he accepted another Uber pickup request. He completed this without any problems. The passengers didn't notice anything unusual about Dalton's behavior. Dalton called his wife and told her not to call her parents. This was at 8:26 p.m. Dalton drove to a Kia dealership, arriving at 10:01 p.m. He parked the HHR and walked up to two men who were looking at a vehicle. After asking what they were looking at, he shot and killed both of them. He fired about 18 rounds at that location. He drove to a Cracker Barrel restaurant that was about 5 miles away. He killed 4 women and wounded one 14-year-old girl there. The victims were in 2 different vehicles. Dalton returned to his residence and reloaded his weapon. From the Kia dealership, the police learned that the shooter was driving a Chevrolet HHR. They broadcast the information about the vehicle to the public. Dalton continued to accept Uber pickup requests. 4 minutes past midnight on February 21, he picked up 3 people and took them to a dormitory. Those passengers reported that Dalton wasn't overly friendly, but other than that, they really didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. He picked up 4 more passengers at 12:12 a.m. and drove them to a hotel. One of those passengers had heard a report about a killer that was on the loose and asked Dalton if he was the shooter. He responded, no. After dropping these passengers off, he picked up 3 more passengers. One of those passengers also asked Dalton if he was the shooter. Dalton claimed that he was not. As Dalton dropped off these 3 passengers, a police officer noticed him. The officer followed Dalton as he requested backup. The police pulled Dalton over at 12:40 a.m. He was arrested without incident. In February of 2016, Dalton was charged with 6 counts of murder, 2 counts of assault with intent to commit murder, and 8 counts of using a firearm during the commission of a felony. On January 7, 2019, right before his trial was going to start, Dalton pleaded guilty to all the charges. About a month later, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now moving to my analysis. Dalton was interviewed by the police. They said he expressed no emotion during the interview. Dalton told investigators that he had not been sleeping well and that something strange happened with the Uber app. He was working for Uber less than a week when he noticed a symbol of the Eastern Star on the app. He tapped it and a devil head popped up. Dalton would say, quote, "The minute that I logged on, to be honest with you, I don't know what happened. I know you guys are going to have a hard time believing me, but it literally took over my mind and body," unquote. He would go on to tell them that it was like a cow with horns. Even though I think that Dalton could have been telling the truth here, we know that the officers did not believe him, which makes me believe as Dalton was talking about a cow with horns, the officers were thinking, the word you're looking for is bull, just like your story. Dalton went on to say that he pressed the button, and that's when the problem started. The Uber app took control of him. It gave him the ability to drive over 100 miles per hour and go through stoplights. The app told him that he could say whatever he wanted. There would be no consequences. The color of the app would change between red and black. When it's black, it had control over him. When it was red, everything was all right. When the app gave him an assignment, he had to complete it. He was a puppet. His phone was talking to him, making noises. 1 ding meant yes, and 2 dings meant no. So he's saying pretty clearly that the phone was directing his behavior. The phone took over his mind and was simply telling him to do everything that he did. One of the big questions with Dalton, of course, is what was going on with his mental health? Was anything going on? Did he just choose to do this out of nowhere, or was he psychotic? So was there a break from reality? His behavior had become unusual not long before the crimes. People said he was a little depressed. However, Dalton had no mental health history, no criminal history, and was not using substances. A mental health assessment found him to be competent to stand trial. It was not a thorough assessment. Here are some of the items reported in the assessment. Dalton's emotional expression was restricted. He did not appear to be in distress. His speech was goal-directed and organized. His memory was intact. He had the ability to concentrate. Dalton indicated that his cell phone was giving him special messages. He claimed he heard voices when he was driving for Uber. At another time, during a court proceeding, Dalton had to be removed from the courtroom due to disruptive behavior and would later be seen talking to himself. So what could be happening in this situation? Well, one possibility is nothing. This could all be an act. which would explain how he returned back to a mostly normal presentation so quickly. It is, of course, possible that Dalton has a mental disorder related to psychosis, but there's no way to know based on the information available. Furthermore, if he does have a disorder, there's no way to know which disorder would be causing these symptoms. There are several mental disorders that can lead to psychosis. I'll go through a few here. First, we see schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. It's unusual for schizophrenia to have a late onset. The onset is usually in the late teens or 20s. The onset can be rapid, but often symptoms of cluster A personality features are observable prior to the onset. So people see behavior related to paranoid, schizoid, or schizotypal personality features. The next one would be a major mood disorder, like major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder. Major mood disorders usually do not have a rapid onset, like one day somebody's fine and the next day they have severe symptoms. Another possibility is brief psychotic disorder. The symptoms here can manifest and resolve quickly, so that seems consistent with what happened. The difficulty is that the group most likely to be affected would be women in early to middle adulthood, and it's almost always thought of as a reaction to extreme stress. There's no indication that Dalton was under extreme stress. One last disorder to consider would be delusional disorder. I think this one makes more sense than the others. We see this temporary period of delusions. It has an average onset age of 40, and the persecutory type is more common in males. There were some indications that Dalton was paranoid. The difficulty with delusional disorder is its rarity. It affects only 0.1% of the population. And if Dalton had a temporary disorder that now resolved, why plead guilty? Why not fight the charges? It seems unusual that somebody would have temporary symptoms, commit a number of homicides, and then be okay with pleading guilty. One would think they'd want to have their voice heard to explain that there was something going on with a mental disorder, therefore they were not responsible or not fully responsible. When considering everything, there are reasons to be skeptical about the presence of any particular disorder in this case, but these disorders are still technically possibilities. It's hard to understand what motive he would have had to commit these crimes outside of something like psychosis. We don't see many people commit homicides, then work normally for a bit, and then commit more homicides. Now, of course, in a longer time frame, serial killers do this, but to see it compressed like this, where somebody can commit a crime, then transport passengers for a while, and then commit another crime, especially a crime like homicide, this is something that's just unheard of. Perhaps all of this was intentional, and he just wanted to gain attention, do something different, try to stand out, like break away from a boring life. It's really not clear. There are a few different possible motives outside of psychosis. If psychosis was at work in this case, I think what's frightening here is not only the murders, but the idea that a mobile app could be integrated into the delusion. This shouldn't be surprising, of course, considering there have been many reports involving delusions related to radio, television, email, and texting. As technology becomes more popular, it will be integrated into more delusional thoughts. Given the frightening and random nature of these homicides, how can something like this be prevented? One way would be to give the scientific community the data on the mental health conditions that may be present, so assessment data. Considering the ramifications of Dalton's behavior, I think it would make sense to conduct an assessment and release the findings, similar to what we see in the cases of Ted Kaczynski, Dylan Roof, or James Holmes, where massive amounts of information were released. It's important that researchers be able to study mental health conditions that could be connected to violence. Those are my thoughts on the case of Jason Dalton. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.